Welcome. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DA SASIE. Thank you. This is episode 44. Today's episode, of course, you can guess it, it's all about the Super Bowl. That's right. Tomorrow is the big game, last game of the season. It's the game that everybody's been waiting for. It's the most watched sporting event of all time. Here we go. Super Bowl time. All right, so we're going to break this down into two different sections. The first part of this episode is going to be me talking about who has the better segment of their team. And then we're going to get into my prediction for the game and why I think it is going to be my prediction. So, let's get into it. So to kick off Super Bowl Sunday, we got to first get into my Super Bowl comparison. So in this comparison, I'm going to break down the Eagles versus the Chiefs in terms of each position group. All right. And then let you know who I think is winning each position group, so on and so forth. So let's go. So to start, we got to go with the offensive line. Now, comparing the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line versus the Kansas City Chiefs offensive line, I think everybody will agree that this one has to be favored to the Eagles. Now, the Eagles arguably have the best offensive line in the entire league. I would say at worst, you might put them third, maybe at worst. But I think most people would agree they're probably the best offensive line in the entire league. Now, the Chiefs' offensive line isn't bad, but mainly their strengths are in their interior linemen. Their center and two guards are great. Their tackles, not so much. Now, recently, because the left tackle play had been so bad, Andy Reid decided to move our starting left guard, Joe Thuney, from left guard to left tackle. And he's done a decent job. But that then means that he's being replaced by a backup left guard to block in the interior. We don't know yet if they're going to maintain with that lineup as a starting lineup for this Super Bowl, or if Humphrey's going to come back and take on the starting left tackle role. I did see some clips of him at practice, so he might be starting, but we don't know yet. But nonetheless, regardless of the shuffle of the Chiefs' offensive line, I still got to give the edge to the Eagles for sure. Now for the next position, we got to go to quarterback. This is another one where I feel like everybody will agree. The quarterback comparison has to go to the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes is the number one quarterback in the entire league. He's the number one quarterback in his era, and I don't think anybody's going to refute that. I have Mahomes right now as the second best quarterback of all time, even before the Super Bowl. So even if he were to lose the Super Bowl, I still have Mahomes as the second best quarterback of all time. If he were to lose the Super Bowl, obviously there are going to be people who will still put Joe Montana ahead of him. You might even get a couple people who say they put Peyton Manning ahead of him just because of the longevity, stuff like that. But nonetheless, if you ask me, he's already second, and I think on most people's board, he's worst case, he's fourth already as the best quarterback of all time. I have him second right now, and obviously if he were to win the Super Bowl, it would clearly put him in second. Some people would even make the argument he's first. I wouldn't, but I do believe that he is settled in second best of all time, which means in this quarterback comparison, obviously he's going to be the one that is higher. Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback. He has been a little up and down in terms of his overall career. I would definitely say Jalen Hurts is a top 10 quarterback right now in the league currently, but definitely he's not taking the edge over Patrick Mahomes in terms of position comparison. Now, the next grouping we're going to get to on the offense is the receiving core. Now, this one is another one that I think is an obvious choice that it has to go to the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are, I would say, arguably have a top 3 receiving core, but I think everybody would agree completely that worst case, they're top 5. So the Eagles definitely have the best receiving core, A.J. Brown is going to be the best receiver on the field at all times. I can make the argument that Devontae Smith is the second best receiver on the field in this game. To me, personally, I would say he's the second best receiver. Then from there, I would say the next best receiver is probably on the Chiefs. It's kind of hard to decide if that next best receiver is DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, or Xavier Worthy. It kind of just depends. Obviously, if you're going by like career-wise, Hopkins would be even higher. But in terms of play on the field today, it's close between those three. Obviously, Hopkins is the most like experienced, best hands and things like that. But when you add in like speed and route running at this point in his career, it's a toss-up between those three. But nonetheless, like I said, the top two receivers are so far ahead of the next three receivers that it's a no-brainer comparison. The receiving core position has to go in favor of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the next group we're getting to, also on the offense, second to last group on the offense, is the running backs. Now, the running backs is another one. It's a no-brainer. It's got to go to the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles have Saquon Barkley, and essentially nothing else really matters. I think Kareem Hunt is a good running back. I think Isaiah Pacheco is a good running back. I think when Isaiah Pacheco is fully healthy going into next year, he'll be a top 10 running back easily. But he did have an injury earlier this season, and he hasn't quite got back his full momentum, like all of his shiftiness and so on and so forth. And Saquon Barkley is just basically leaps and bounds better than everybody who's going to be on the field in the running back position. To me, Saquon Barkley had the best season of a running back this year. And overall, I would say he's definitely top three in terms of running backs in the season. The other two in comparison are Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey. Now, I would say of this era, it's definitely Derrick Henry. I would say this year, I got to give it to Saquon because Saquon is also more reliable in the pass game and stuff like that. Christian McCaffrey is usually in that mix, but because he was hurt pretty much all season, I can't put him above those other two, even if you tell me today he's 100% healthy. I got to wait till next year to see it. So, as of right now, like I said, Saquon Barkley's a top-tier running back. He's got to get the nod in the running back room in comparison between that position in the Super Bowl. Now, for the last offensive position comparison is the tight end position. And this is another one that I feel like is obvious. It's got to go to the Kansas City Chiefs. Travis Kelce is arguably the best tight end of all time. Even if you don't have him number one, I would say worse, you might have him third, with Gronk and Tony Gonzalez or something like that. Even if you mention people like Antonio Gates, there's no way you're putting Antonio Gates ahead of Travis Kelce. You're not putting Kellen Winslow ahead of Travis Kelce. Anybody else. So Shannon Sharp, you're not putting him ahead of Travis Kelce. So the only two that I would really even entertain an argument for is Gonzalez and Gronk. But personally, I would say he surpassed them at this point, mainly because of his playoff achievements. He has some of the most ridiculous stats in terms of playoffs, and that's really how we separate great players in terms of are they the same when it's crunch time? In the most important games when it's playoff time, are they the same? Or do they elevate themselves to another level? And every single year, Travis Kelce has elevated himself in the playoffs to the point where he's second in almost every single receiving category for playoff statistics. And that includes every receiver. The only statistics that he's behind are in comparison to Jerry Rice. And if he decides to play next year, he has a good chance of becoming number one in all of the categories, and he's a tight end. So definitely, and it's no knock on Dallas Goedert. I think Dallas Goedert is easily a top 10 tight end in the league, but again, he's not better than Travis Kelce, so this comparison obviously goes to the Chiefs. Okay, so the next player comparison goes to the defensive side, and on the defensive side, we got to start up front in the trenches with the defensive line. Now, this one, I have heard people talk about this comparison in other sports shows, and for some reason there's a debate about this. I don't think there is. In terms of comparison, I would say it has to be the Kansas City Chiefs have the better defensive line. I mean, to me, it's pretty straightforward. The Eagles' best defensive lineman is clearly Jalen Carter, but Jalen Carter is not better than the Chiefs' best defensive lineman, who is Chris Jones. Chris Jones is easily the best defensive tackle in the league. I think that's pretty much well known. I think Jalen Carter could become the best defensive tackle in the league within the next 2 years or so. But as of today, no, it's definitely Chris Jones, especially when it comes to playoffs. He always makes huge impact on the biggest plays in timely fashion in every big game. I don't think anybody can argue that Jalen Carter is better than Chris Jones right now. Then after the best two players in comparison, I would still take George Karlaftis, Charles Omenihu, before I take any other Philadelphia defensive lineman. So I think it's pretty much cut and dry. And now part of that is that the Eagles run a 3-4 and the Chiefs run a 4-3. So sometimes people are counting the Eagles' outside linebackers as a part of that D line because oftentimes they're up on the line of scrimmage and they're going after the quarterback, but they're linebackers. Like Nolan Smith is a linebacker. He's not a defensive lineman. So when it comes to a comparison in defensive linemen, to me it's pretty clear cut that the Chiefs win that comparison in the Super Bowl. Now for the next position group is the linebackers. Now this one I went back and forth with. At the end of the day, I'm basically looking at the general public's sense of their production. And based on recent history, I have to give the edge to the Philadelphia Eagles. Their linebacker, Zach Bond, was actually a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year. And to me, I think that's huge. So based on that, and based on their outside linebackers that I mentioned, that some people think they're defensive ends at times, are included in that mix, and they do a good job of creating pressure and things like that, I'm going to give the edge in linebackers to the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, if you're asking just me personally, would I rather build a team with the Eagles linebackers or the Chiefs linebackers, I would say the Chiefs linebackers. I think that Nick Bolton is actually a better linebacker than Zach Bond, but from production in this year, we have to go off of Zach Bond being a finalist, so I can't do that in terms of being objective. But if you gave me Nick Bolton and Drew Tranquil, yeah, I'm taking them, and then you add in Leo Chanel, who's had huge plays in special teams. I'm taking our linebacker core over the Eagles linebacker core. But from a third party's perspective, I can understand why people say Philadelphia. So for the sake of this segment, I'm going to give it to the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the next defensive position group we're going to go with are defensive backs. Now, this one was tricky, mainly because in comparison to the best defensive back on both sides, it's between Darius Slay and Trent McDuffie. Now, I would say today that Trent McDuffie is a better cornerback than Darius Slay, but it's really, really close. And obviously, Darius Slay has more experience. He's been one of these top-tier corners for a longer period of time. But if you look at just pure recent accolades, Trent McDuffie has been All-Pro 2 years in a row, and he's only played, I think this is only his third year. So, that would kind of speak to what I was talking about in terms of linebackers in comparing Bolton and Bond. So, in that comparison, I think it's fair, even if we're just talking about right now, to put McDuffie slightly ahead of Slay. But for the overall, I'm going to give the edge to Philadelphia because I would say that when it goes to the second and third corners, Philadelphia's corners are way better than the Chiefs' corners. I know Watson is decent, but based on production and the fact that he was hurt for most of the season, comparing him to Cooper DeJean, and I can't remember the other rookie cornerback they have, they've been playing really well. So, and then you go to safety, I like Justin Reed a lot, but, if you look at the overall collective of the Eagles safeties and the depth chart of Eagles safeties, I'm still going to give a slight edge to the Eagles. So compare that with the corner comparison and the safeties overall and the nickels. I got to go with Philadelphia as the better defensive backfield. Now, the next segment that I'm going to compare is the segment that often gets overlooked, but is crucial, especially in big-time games like the Super Bowl, and that is special teams. And to me, goes back to some of those earlier comparisons. It's a no-brainer. Special teams clearly goes to the Chiefs. The Chiefs have the better kicker. The Chiefs have the better punter. The Chiefs have the better special teams coach. The Chiefs have been more explosive in the return game. The Chiefs have had more block field goals than anybody. It's clearly the Chiefs. I would argue that the Chiefs have the best special teams in the entire league this season, and it'd be pretty hard to argue against that. I don't think that Philadelphia's special teams is bad, but I just don't think there's no way you're going to say that they're better than the Chiefs' special teams, especially when the Chiefs have Butker, who's one of the best kickers in the league. I would argue he's the best kicker in the league, especially considering the struggles that Justin Tucker had this year. I think that Butker surpassed him this year. Now, the last part is technically not a player comparison, but it is a comparison that plays a factor in this game, and that is coaching. Now, in coaching comparison, I have to give the edge to the Chiefs. Now, I'm not one of these people who are down on Nick Sirianni. I don't know, for some reason, people seem to think he's not that good of a coach. I think he's a really good coach. But, based on the production that he's had, I could see somebody arguing that he's a top 5 coach in the league. What I take him as my 5th best coach in the league? I'd have to think on it longer. My initial guess would be no, but he's not far off of that. I would definitely put him in my top 10 coaches in the league. So, again, he's a good coach. Now, then when you go to, back to the head coach part, Andy Reid is arguably a top 3 coach all time. So, and there's people talking about that if he were able to get this Super Bowl win, he could be battling for that number 1 spot, especially when you take into account what Andy Reid and Bill Belichick have done without their most outstanding quarterbacks. If you look at Andy Reid's record without Mahomes and Bill Belichick's record without Tom Brady, there's a huge difference in production and accolades. So I understand that. I'm not going that route quite yet, but I can understand the argument. But definitely, I think it's clearly there's an edge on the Chiefs, and that's just in the head coaching. Then when you go to the assistants, Steve Spagnuolo, to me, is a Hall of Fame defensive coordinator. And, Matt Nagy is the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs. He's like a placeholder. Everybody knows Andy Reid calls the plays. It's the same thing that why people weren't giving enough credit to Eric Bieniemy when he was the Chiefs OC. I'm not giving Nagy that much. I know he plays a factor, and I'm not diminishing his part that he plays, but he's not really what I'm going into it. But in terms of arguably the best coach in the league, arguably the best defensive coordinator in the league, arguably the best special teams coach in the league. So yes, I do believe that the coaching aspect has to go in favor of the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay, so now that we have finished all of the comparisons, we got to get into my final Super Bowl prediction. Now, as going back to the comparisons, I think overall, I would say that the Eagles, top to bottom, have the better player personnel. I think that the Chiefs have the better coaching. So it's really going to come down to clutch moments and very important strategic thought processes. How each team is going to play the game. How are they going to counter once they see what the other team is doing? All of these things are going to come and play a huge role in this game. This is one of those games where any outcome that happens, I wouldn't be surprised. And I literally mean any outcome. Like, if the Eagles were to blow out Chiefs, I could see it happening. It would just take Saquon Barkley being dominant. If Saquon Barkley gets like 120 yards or something like that, 2 touchdowns, he's running the ball down the Chiefs' throat, which is keeping the Chiefs on the sideline. And then the Eagles' defense, because they've been very opportunistic, they punch out the ball on Xavier Worthy and they create a fumble and they score a touchdown off of it, and Jalen Hurts is basically managing the game very well, yeah, I could see this turn into a blowout. I could see the Eagles winning by 17 points, and I wouldn't be shocked. I could see Jalen Carter completely wrecking the game with Tooney being moved out to tackle and him being isolated against the backup guard. I know typically he plays the other side against Trey Smith, but it's Super Bowl. I could see them moving him. So all of those things could happen, and I could see the Eagles blowing the Chiefs out in this game. I could also see the other way around where the Eagles are unable to run the ball at all, and the Chiefs' focus is so heavily on stopping the run that it forces the Eagles to get into their pass game because the Chiefs plan well and they come out in their first scoring drive and they score a touchdown, and then they get a stop and then they score another touchdown, and now the Eagles are playing from behind, and so they got to go pass happy, and I don't think that's where the strength of their team lies, and Jalen Hurts gets pressured and he creates turnovers and the defense scores at it, and then the game gets out of hand and the Chiefs end up winning by 14 or 17. I can see that too. I could also see it being a really tight game where it goes back and forth, and it's a high-scoring game, and it just depends on who has the ball last, and they both score well over 30 points like they did in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. I could also see a defensive battle where both teams barely get over 20 points, and each defense is counteracting every single thing the offense has in store, and nobody's being very productive, and there's a bunch of field goals. All of these things are on the table. All of these things are possible. If I was not a Chiefs fan, I'd probably predict that the Eagles are going to win this game. I just think that their strengths align very well against the Chiefs. I think especially the whole Jalen Carter part, I think Jalen Carter could completely wreck this game. So, objectively speaking, I don't fault anybody for picking the Eagles. And if I wasn't a Chiefs fan, I might pick the Eagles. But there's a reason why I'm in Chiefs gear today. There's a reason that, along with the Chiefs hat, I'm wearing the Chiefs beanie and the Chiefs jersey. It's because I'm a Chiefs fan. It's because I've been a Chiefs fan since 1992. It's because we are on the brink of doing something no team has ever done in history, going back to back to back and winning 3 Super Bowls in a row. This would be monumental. This would be historic. This would be the greatest feat of any team in modern history. Football is the hardest sport to be dominant in for a long period of time. There's so many players involved. There's so many aspects where the league is structured for you not to be good year after year. So of course I'm picking the Chiefs. And I'm picking us to win a close game. I say that we win by 3 points. My final score prediction is the Chiefs 27 and the Eagles 24. Mahomes and the rest of the Chiefs making history. That wraps up this episode. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I can't wait to see you in the next episode after Super Bowl. Peace.